tonight what we want to do is to evaluate 4 head of cattle and try to give you the synopsis of what I would do if I was a live cattle buyer for somebody. Try to have you be able to look at livestock and be able to evaluate those and try to put it into a numerical context of quality grade and yield grades and be able to surmise that. And those of you that's in the feedlot business, you do it all the time. As part of your job is to evaluate and figure out when you want to kill these animals. And I don't want to be grossly redundant to you, but I'm just going to kind of give you my spiel, and so that you can kind of see some of the things that we tell in a normal PQA type deal, or permit, what we tell producers, restaurateurs, and all these kinds of situations. We've got 4 head in the back that I bought last week, and one of them is basically a straight Angus, the best I can tell. This calf weighed this morning, not really, this afternoon, just as they pulled. Our feedlot is right over here, so I bought them last Tuesday, and then we got them trucked in here. They weighed them a while ago. I took a 4% pencil shrink on them because they've had feed in front of them since they've been here, and we're just assuming that they were full when they weighed them. And so this will be the pay weight that we're going to use in terms of pay weight, so 1258 on the black steer. This is virtually a 100% limousine steer. 1240, its pay weight's 1190. This is a straight Hereford steer. Looks like to me he may have a little bit more age on him just in his head, but I think he's still an A-bone type calf. Weighed 1285 with pay weight of 1234. And then a black baldy steer. This is basically a Hereford Angus cross. Weighed 1295 with a 1243 pay weight. You have 2 different cards. Some of you got blue, some of you got maybe have both of them. It doesn't really make any difference what you use. But what we want to do today is to try to evaluate some of these various traits. And the first thing that we want to evaluate basically would be carcass weight on these cattle. And we heard quite a bit of discussion. I was sitting here a while ago basically in terms of looking at dressing percent, and what most people in our industry would consider probably somewhere today would be around 63.75% as far as a average dressing percent in our industry today. And all we're doing there is taking carcass weight divided by a live weight, and that might be pay weight in this case, and calculating that into a percentage, and that would be our dressing percent. This becomes a very, very important number as it relates to grids, because when you start looking at actually putting an animal into a quadrant, say a choice yield or CAB yield grade 2, well then that's what he may get. His carcass is priced at that weight or at that price, but then it changes greatly whether it's a 700 pound carcass, 800, 900 pound carcass in terms of dollars returned back to the producer. And so most people don't give a lot of credence to this, but it's extremely important to the producer or to the owner of the cattle as it relates back to how much dollar return that individual has. This can vary substantially from in the high 50s up to 66 or 67%. And basically, this can be light muscle cattle, very thin cattle, kind of like cows, possibly. Some Holsteins can be down in this range, all the way up to extremely muscular cattle. Even though they might be lean, the weight of that carcass in relation to its live weight, you can have some cattle that would dress 66, 67 pretty handily. And so dressing percent becomes extremely important. And as far as the amount of muscle that an animal has, typically the dressing percent will go up. The amount of fat that an animal has, the dressing percentage will go up. The amount of fill that the animal has, the dressing percentage will go down. And so as you start thinking about trying to analyze these cattle then those come into play, because I'm going to use this number a lot in how I evaluate these cattle. So as I go back there tonight, and I'm going to look at them the same time as y'all do. I kind of went back while ago and made sure I had them in the right pens. But I'm going to be looking at them. I'm going to try to estimate dressing percent myself and some of these various characteristics, and then we'll discuss them, and then I'll see how bad I did on Wednesday morning. The next column that you have would be fat thickness. And what we're going to do is we're going to rib those animals between, as Brad mentioned a while ago, between the 12th and 13th rib. And if you just look at the animal, it's not quite exactly close to halfway through the body. We're going to find that 13th rib, and we're going to go in and we're going to rib right between the 12th and 13th. And we're going to estimate from the center part of that carcass around about 3/4 of the way around that, and we're going to measure this in inches. And the national average today is right about a ½ inch of fat, give or take 55 hundredths. And the cattle that you're going to look at tonight probably will vary, and I don't know, we may have one down in around 25 hundredths, and we may have one that would approach an inch of cover tonight. And so I don't know whether it'd be quite that fat, but there's going to be some variation in fatness tonight. And so as we look at these cattle, obviously things that we're going to pay attention to is shape. Muscle is round, fat is square. And so as we start putting these fat on these animals, we're going to estimate this number because it's the first number that we're going to use in yield grade calculations. So we need to know how much fat there's going to be at this 12th rib, and that's the first number that we're going to actually use in terms of a yield grade calculation. The next thing we're going to use is ribeye area. Now what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to estimate the square inches of this ribeye area on a live animal. And you say, man, that's pretty tough. Well, it's not either. And if you see a lot of these cattle and you see enough of them, it gets to be fairly easy, and from the standpoint of getting in a ballpark range. Now we can miss one. I used to miss a 4-pound chicken 3.5 pounds. And so we can miss one, but if you look at lots of them, pretty soon you can kind of get in the ball game. And so if you look at pretty muscular cattle, what I would call and you would call a very heavy muscled animal, those cattle will have between 1.8 upwards to 2.2 square inches of ribeye area per 100 pounds of carcass weight. So if you look at a cattle with 700-pound carcass, and that animal's pretty muscular, and let's say he has a 2 square inch ribeye, he's going to have a 14-inch rib. And so that basically helps you kind of categorize those animals, and by coming back here and kind of calculating a dressing percent on those animals, or estimating a dressing percent, calculating a carcass weight, which I'm going to do tonight, then I'm going to take that number and I'm going to start playing with some numbers here to try to estimate ribeye size in relation to their carcass weight. Kind of average muscle cattle are going to be somewhere between 1.6 and 1.75 square inches of ribeye area per 100 pounds of carcass weight. Now to help you a little bit, on the back of your card, there's a box that's got carcass weights and ribeye areas on the back of your card. Those would be average muscle cattle. So what you consider average muscle, that's what those would be. That would be the base ribeye in relation to carcass weight that we use in a yield grade calculation. So what we're going to do is I'm going to look at this steer and I'm going to say, well, he's got an 800-pound carcass, he should have a 13.4, but I think he's more muscular than that. Based on this information, he's got a 14.4, and because he is more muscular, then I'm going to subtract some numbers from his yield grade because he has got more meat in him. Or if he's lighter muscled, I'm going to add some numbers to his yield grade. And so we would do that. Light muscle cattle are going to be less than 1.6, and they would typically be down around 1.4 to 1.5 square inches of ribeye per 100 pounds of carcass weight. One of the things that we in our industry, and as much genetic progress as we've made over the years, we still have cattle that are too light muscle in our whole industry. And so that becomes a problem with us. We've got way too many cattle still down in here and not enough cattle, up here. But at the same time, I don't need a lot of cattle with this kind of, because Dr. Morgan talked about portion size. And so that becomes a little bit of an issue for you. And so that's the next number. And then you have a number we call percent kph. That's going to be the amount of internal waste inside that carcass around the kidney, pelvic, and heart fat. Now, according to yield grade calculations, 3.5% is base or average. And that's where we're going to use as a numerical base in our yield grade calculation, but that's completely false today. Most of the cattle that we would harvest would be down around 2.5 maximum, typically 2, maybe even 1.5. We have the way that we are harvesting, the way we are managing the cattle, and we're going to have less internal fat than typical. So what we're going to do, you may have cattle, and I apologize for my pen, but it's going to be down, you will have cattle that could be down in this range, meaning quite a bit less internal fat. And that comes involved, and that gets involved in the yield grade calculation as well. So then we come to yield grade. And we have a numerical system that 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s, and 5s. These are very lean, very heavy muscle cattle. These are fat, light muscle cattle, and this is the industry average. And so I was watching Dr. Van Overbeck and her description that we needed or wanted more yield grade 2s today, and I would agree with that. And these cattle run the risk of not having enough quality grade to them. And some of you may be familiar with Lohr's lean. That's what these are. Okay, these are yield grade 1, very muscular, very lean cattle. In fact, the discounts on Lohr's lean start at yield grade 2.0. So anything that's 2.0 gets a discount this way, Lohr's lean. Now, in contrast, the grid that we're going to work with, the discounts are here as in 4s and 5s. That's where the discounts will be. And so these will be fairly light muscled kind of cattle. So what we're going to do initially is we're going to start with an estimation of fat thickness. And I apologize for this pen. But that's what I was asking Deb about, do we have any more pens? Because I'm fixing to run out of ink here. So our fat thickness at the 12th rib, we're going to start out with 0, 1/10, 2/10, 3/10, 4/10, 6/10. I'm just going to jump here. And this is what we're going to call a preliminary yield grade. This is going to be 2. For every 10th, we're going to go up 0.25. So I'm skipping 1 in here at 0.5 is 3.25. So this will be 3.5, 4.0, 4.5, and 5. So this will be the preliminary number. So when I'm going to use this number right here, and let's say that the average of the industry is 5/10. Well, I'm going to start that animal at, in this case, 3.25 would be his preliminary yield grade. And then I'm going to take an idea of what his ribeye is in relation to his carcass weight. And so let's say that I've got a 800-pound carcass. The base on that carcass is a 13.4. Okay? So let's say that we're going to estimate that his ribeye area is a 15.4. That means that this animal is heavier muscle. And the rule is for every 1 square inch superior to base, I'm going to subtract 3/10 from PYG. So in this case, if he was 2 square inches, 2 square inches superior times 3/10, that's 6/10 that I'm going to subtract. So in this animal right here, I would subtract 6/10. Now he's a 2.65 because he's got more muscle, less fat. Just as conversely, if he was an 11.4, then for every square inch inferior to base, I'm going to add 3/10 to PYG. So in that case, now he would be 3.85 if he was inferior to his muscle. And so I'm going to basically make this value judgment, and let's say that I estimated him to have 11.8 in this example. So he's 1.6 away times 3/10, that's 4,800 adjustment. And so I'm going to evaluate those animals and make that judgment. The very last thing then would be percent KPH. And this is 0 adjustment. This is minus 1/10, minus 2/10, minus 3/10, minus 4/10, minus 5/10. And so if I started an animal out at 5/10, 3.25. In the case of this animal here, let's just do that example. He was 4,800, so I'm going to add that, so it's 3.73. Let's say that he had 2.5% internal fat, it's minus 2/10. Now he's a 3.5 yield grade. He would be stamped with 3. 3 is 3.00 to 3.99. It's full complement of yield grade 3. You don't round anything up, you always round down. So in this case, the 3.53, I'd call him a 3.5. So you always round down to a whole number. Okay? So that is a yield grade. Is what we're going to do in terms of the yield grade calculation. We're going to look at and estimate fat cover. We're going to estimate carcass weight, ribeye size, calculate an adjustment there in terms of the yield grade, estimate internal fat, and come up with a yield grade that we're going to call tonight for you. And we'd like to have you do as much of that as you want to do, or as little of it as you want to do. But we'd sure like to have you do as much of that as you can. And in your manual, about at the very back of section 2, and about 3 pages forward of that, you've got this sheet right here. In the very back of section 2, you've got about 3 pages back, you've got this sheet. Now, one of these days we're going to go ahead and get the standard in here. But standard is right down here. It's actually 2 grades of margin score. it would be practically devoid and traces. They both sit right down here. And that would be USDA standard. The slight degree of marbling is USDA select. So that right there is a USDA select. The next grade up would be small degree of marbling. And that would be, it's at the very back of section 2. Then go forward. Yeah, there you are, right there. So we've got 2 degrees of marbling down here that are practically devoid is the worst. And the next one up is traces. And that would be standard grade. Okay, then the next one up would be slight. That would be USDA select. And it would go from slight 00 up to slight 90. That would be selects. And then small 00 would start low choice up to small 90. Now the trouble is that this right here is a tough call. And so sometimes right now it's about $3 or $4 spread, choice select spread. It can be as high as 15 or 18. And the difference between slight 90 and small 0 is nothing. It's just a call. And so but it can be significant, and it may be, like I said, sometimes a year, especially in the summer, spring, the grilling time gets to be fairly wide, especially if we don't have a lot of choice cattle. Well then, $15 discount for selects times an 8-weight carcass, that's $120. Boom. Over whether a federal grader calls it slight 90 or small 0, and that gets back to instrument grading again. That's what people would like to see, instrument grading, to try to get out that margin, especially if our federal grader had too many tequilas last night. I was in there grading carcasses at 5 in the morning and started calling differences between it was impacting the producer or the feedlot operator or whoever who had the carcasses $100 a swing on a cost, and it gets to be pretty touchy. So the small 0 is low choice. Okay, modest 0 to modest 90, that's average choice, and that is the lowest grade that is eligible for certified Angus beef or sterling silver or other products that would be associated with average choice. Okay, that's the lowest grade eligible. There's a premium today, $2, $3 between low choice and CAB or sterling silver or that product. So from small to modest, there may be a premium of $2 or $3 per hundredweight. Okay, right down here, moderate, that's high choice. That is still in the CAB or what we call premium choices. So modest and moderate go into premium choice and would qualify for certified Angus beef or sterling silver or various programs. And then we have slightly abundant, that's low prime. And that's what Morton's of Chicago, Ruth Chris, various chains would serve. And then you go up to high prime, which would be moderately abundant up here. Today, there's probably anywhere around $10 to $11 premium for primes. And so, as Dr. Morgan mentioned, there's only about 2% of the cattle that we will harvest will be in this category. Now, just as, and I don't know whether they've already told you this, and so this is redundant, then I'm sorry. But down here at standard, where we are right down here, I guess right down here would be standards, 1 out of every 2 steaks would be considered unsatisfactory by the consumer. 1 out of every 2 in terms of taste, palatability, toughness, these kind of things. 1 out of every 4 selects will be considered unsatisfactory. out of every 6 low choices would be considered unsatisfactory. 1 out of every 10 or 11 of the CAB, or sterling silver, premium choices would be considered unsatisfactory. And then in prime, 1 out of 33. So the reason why you go into Morton's of Chicago and you pay $35 to $40 for an 8-ounce filet, you pay $5 to $8 for a baked potato, you pay $8 for a salad, you pay $8 for some broccoli, $14 for a glass of wine, and then $14 for the next glass of wine, and then you walk out of there without any dessert for about $80 to $100, you don't want this to be tough. That's why they serve prime. It is an eating experience. And that market is up nationwide about 25%. So people have money. And when they want to spend, have an evening out to spend that kind of money, then that's what they want to eat. And so that's, and the whole issue there is the very low supply, very high demand for eating experience. And that's what you're trying to shoot for. We don't have enough of it. But we're going to try to estimate this today on live cattle. Okay? And what you do in that regard is looking at, obviously, pay weights. Are they at a pay weight that they should have reached what we call physiological maturity? Have they been fed long enough to reach a weight where they should be able to grade choice if they have the genetics to grade choice? We call that physiological maturity. And so as we start evaluating that, typically that's somewhere around a ½ inch of fat with 30% body fat. That animal has got enough body fat to have as much fat deposition into great choice inside the meat itself. The amount of fat in here, that animal has as much as that animal will ever have. Okay, it's a possibility. And there are certain breeds that can grade, and there are certain breeds that cannot grade. Can a pink-nosed Charolais grade prime? Yes, with a certain genetics. But the probability that the average pink-nosed Charolais is going to grade prime is 0. Okay? But they are individual animals, individual genetic in that breed that can. So our job is to identify those. Same way with limousine. Is it possible for a limousine steer to grade prime? Yes. What's the probability? 0. Unless you can identify the genetic strain. What's the probability that Angus will grade prime? 0. Okay? But there are individual animals that can. What's the probability that an Angus will grade certified Angus beef? Average choice or higher. Today it's 17% of all the Angus cattle that are harvested. Only 17% will fit that. So you've got to identify genetic strains that will do it. I was telling Travis that I've killed some cattle here recently, and I'm killing some more. I've got 1,000 on feed right now. I've got a strain of Angus cattle that 35% grade prime, and the other 65% all grade CAB. But that set of cattle has been bred for marbling for the last 15, 16 years. And so, so there's a higher percentage of them that are doing that, and I've got 45 bulls now that I'm prodigy testing, trying to find sons of this bull that I just got to kill some of, because I got more of them, so that I can multiply them, and get them out in the industry and possibly have more of those. But they are animals that will perform. It's no different than having an animal that gains 6 pounds a day in a feed yard. Are they sons? Yeah. What's the probability that they're all going to do it? None, 0. But there are some. But it's all genetic. In the same way with marbling, it's all genes. And if you can identify those, then we can propagate those and we can have more. If we get more of them that grade prime, what's going to happen to the price for prime?